Grateful to be here. About a 35-minute ride from my house, which is 10 minutes closer to my house than ITEC is. So I felt like I was taking a shortcut and have to take a little bit longer road to get to work tomorrow. We live over in Ocala. We've been here for a little over a year. And I would love to tell you the 1956 story. I'm certainly going to try to build our story into that story because something that Steve Saint has said consistently since I've met him is let God write your story. And so all of us have a story, and some of those stories look different than other people's stories. Some of the chapters of your story and of my story are pretty ugly, but the beautiful thing is that the author of our story doesn't write it in one chapter. And not only does he not write it in one chapter, but he continually writes it until the word says it is perfected. And so he is continually writing our story until the day of perfection, when we lay down this body and we go in our redeemed body that was not of ourselves. It was truly a work of the Redeemer, Christ. And so without further ado, I'd love to pray, and then I'll get into our story. I'd love to introduce you to my tribe here, and then we'll get into God's word some and into the story. Sound good? Awesome. Lord, thank you for this opportunity. You're a good, good Father. In the midst of parts of our stories that just seem so difficult, seem so troubled, Lord, you remain good and faithful through it all. In fact, your word says that if we love you, that you will work all things together for good. And so, Lord, we are grateful that even in the most difficult times, as we're about to read about Peter and Jesus, Lord, even in the midst of Peter's difficulties, you worked all things together for good. And even in 1956, the martyrdom of 5 missionaries who sought to reach a savage tribe for your name's sake, they were murdered on that beach. But now, a little more than 70 years later, you continue to write an unthinkable story that only a good Father could write. So we're thankful. Lord, help me to speak the words that you would have me to speak, to communicate the things that you would have me to speak. Eliminate Chris from this room and replace it with your Spirit, we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. So I do want to introduce you to my family. I chose to be down here and not up there because I much prefer a conversation than a sermon. So if throughout this I ask for feedback, I'm actually asking you to answer questions. So I am a teacher by nature. I am not a preacher. Was a school teacher in the state of Georgia for 10 years. Was a football coach and a baseball coach. And just have always felt like my gifting is in teaching. And so I do love to study God's Word, but to do what Rob does every week, to dissect the Scriptures in a way that I would stand in a pulpit and preach that message, is certainly not a gifting of mine. But my wife, Rebecca, we've been married. We just celebrated 19 years. Had the privilege of doing that in Tanzania on a mission trip with our organization, ITEC. The mainland of Tanzania is not the most beautiful place, not the most incredible place to celebrate 19 years. But if you take a short ferry ride across the Sound out onto the island of Zanzibar, which is still part of Tanzania, you enter one of the most beautiful places on the planet, and spending dollars is a lot cheaper there than it is here. So we got to do that, celebrate 19 years. It's my oldest son, Peyton. He is almost 17, finishing up his junior year of high school, avid golfer, I come from Augusta, Georgia, so this next week will be Masters Week. I grew up in a house less than a half a mile from that course. We could listen to the roars of the crowd from my living room, and my love and passion for golf has been passed on to my oldest son and also my next son, who is 14. His name is Cy. He has the flowing golden locks here in the front row. Blonde hair, blue-eyed boy. Not sure where in the gene pool that happened, but that's my 14-year-old Cy. And then my daughter, who is 11, soon to be 12. Her name is Maris. So you may have seen a theme. So when we were trying to get names for our kids, they had the curse of being a coach's son and coach's daughter, and my wife had the curse of being married to an old sports fiend. And so I was a huge Bears fan as a kid. I'm a closet Bears fan now, because my mom grew up in the Chicago area, and my cousin actually played for the Cubs for a number of years. So I spent a lot of my childhood flying back and forth to O'Hare and watching the Cubbies play, and also watching the Bears play at Soldier Field. But Walter Payton was my favorite player of all time. So my oldest son is named after Sweetness himself, Walter Payton, and then my son, Cy Young, winningest pitcher in the history of Major League Baseball. And my daughter, that was the hardest one. How do you look at the Sports Hall of Fame and come up with a sports name for a girl? Well, it came down to Palmer, Arnold Palmer, and Roger Maris, and so she's named after a Yankee, and that's hard. That's hard because I'm a Braves fan at heart. So tough to name your kid after a Yankee, especially when they broke our hearts in '96. But anyways, all that to say, that's my family. I'm so proud of the youngest one and the oldest one. They have birthdays coming up, and they're now over the fact that they don't need birthday gifts. So just publicly thanking them for not wanting anything for their birthdays. That's just awesome that you would lay down your life for your poor mother and father and just sacrifice your gifts. So a little bit about our family. Again, born and raised in Augusta, just shared a little bit of my salvation story with Rob. And I'm going to really, really reduce that down because I hear that I only have until 9 o'clock. So I want to make sure that I get this in before 9. So I came to faith at about 23 years old while drunk at a bar. And I have no idea how that happened. But what I can tell you is that there was an amazing story being written for my life. I pretended to be a Christian for a long time in high school and even parts of college, but really at the end of the day, I was living for myself and had no interest in spiritual things really at all. Did kind of the chameleon thing. I would just fit in wherever I could fit in. God chose to write my salvation story while drunk at Surrey Tavern, a place that I had partied for a long time with the guys that I was actually there partying with, and God just said, that's enough. And it was this switch that flipped in my brain that I just said, I can't keep doing this anymore. Now that kind of collided with my wife's story because my wife had accepted Christ earlier in life in middle school through the influence of a youth pastor who actually married us on January 8th of 2005. But he had invested in her. She had come to faith, and she had been walking with God through her high school years and through her college years, and was actually being discipled by a girl that I knew extremely well because my brother married her. And so Chrissy, my sister-in-law, was discipling a girl named Rebecca that I never knew that our stories would collide. But through years of running from God, being angry with God, trying to find some level of happiness at the bottom of a bottle, I found Christ or he found me. And I went back to visit my brother, who was on staff with a Christian ministry at that time, and went to visit him, but found Rebecca at the same place my brother and sister-in-law were at. And we kindled a friendship that we had not had for a few years, and I knew there was something different about her, and so I decided that I needed to find a ring that was fitting for a queen. So I sold literally everything that I had to buy the ring that she's now wearing in desperation. I knew that a face that looks like this could only marry a face that looks like that if you had something expensive to give. And so that ring was like $50. So it was all that I had. So that's our story. And we had said early on, I told her, I'm a coach. I need to know that, I had these dreams of coaching in college or coaching at the professional ranks. If I'm going to do this, I need to know that you're willing to sell everything and you're willing to move whenever God says it's time. And her concession was, we can do that, but you're not going to apply for jobs. If God wants us to move, he'll come and find us. And so we did that. We were committed to that. Started in the inner city, coaching at a really, really rough school in the downtown Augusta area, which is, they filmed a Cops show there. So I'm told that when Cops comes to town that you have a real problem. And so they were filmed in this area, very tough area of Augusta, worked with some hardened criminals, a few guys that are actually, one guy in particular that's on death row, he played quarterback for us, but loved it. And from there was offered a job at a suburban Augusta school, very country club community type school. And I took that job because God clearly had made that where our next call to go. And then a very long story made short, I got out of coaching and actually resigned from teaching. I don't know if there's any teachers in the room, but education's changed a little bit. And it was just to a point where I had had all that I could have in the classroom and really wanted to do something different. So God rescued me from the classroom. I started a landscaping business, literally just with a push mower and a plug-in blower out of the back trunk of my Hyundai Sonata. And that quickly grew to a company that was making enough money for me to actually leave and go and do some things that I had not been able to do as a coach. Coaching football and baseball, they overlap in the summertime, and then they overlap again in the wintertime. So I was 12 months a year between 80 and 100 hours a week. So there was just no way for me to travel. But when I opened this landscaping business, I had the opportunity to go and to go on a short-term mission trip with my church in Augusta. And I went to South Africa, absolutely fell in love with the place. I fell in love with the people. And then a year later, in 2016, I was invited to go back. And so I went back, but my wife, she said, you can go, but you're not going without me. And so we went back together. And it was on that trip that God, I don't know how this works. I wish I had some story of God coming down from the clouds and just this audible voice, but it didn't work that way. But I will tell you that it was as close to audible as I had ever heard the voice of God before. And it said, sell everything that you own and move here. Well, I am terrified of my wife. And those of you that are married in this room, you probably know what I'm talking about. I wear the pants in my house. There is no question. But she tells me which ones to put on every day. So I am terrified of her. She looks sweet and innocent, but she is powerful beyond measure. And so I didn't know exactly how to communicate to my wife what does this look like? We were a coach, and then we were not, and you started this business, and I've watched this thing unfold, and now we've built this business to a really successful business, and now you want me to sell everything and move to Africa? What in the world? Well, I did what, okay, stick with me on this. So I did what every guy would do, I think. You know, I know most of you guys are like, I wouldn't do it that way. Yes, you would. I just threw warning shots above the bow. I was terrified. What is she going to say? Isn't this a beautiful place there in South Africa? Isn't this a beautiful place? Like, yeah, it's okay. This could be a pretty place to, you know, raise kids, right? I mean, I guess. Well, after a few warning shots above the bow, she knows I'm a straight shooter. She looks at me as finally a straight shooter and says, what are you trying to say? And I said, what if God were telling us to sell everything we own and to move here? Now, her response scared me more than anything, because I expected my wife to say, that's the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard. Stop thinking that, and let's just move on. Well, that wasn't her response. Her response was, the only reason I want to go back to the States is to get our kids and come back. What is God doing here? So, you know, naturally came back to the States, met with our pastor in Augusta, fully anticipated him saying, you know what, Chris, you don't have any seminary training. You're just a teacher and a ditch digger. Just calm down, slow your roll, let somebody else go do, you know, the trained person. Let's send them. That's not what he said. His response was, how do we help you get there? This is scary. So long story made short, 9 months later, we had sold everything that we owned, and we were on the ground in South Africa as full-time missionaries. So from January to September of 2016, we had sold everything we owned and moved to South Africa. And we lived there for 6 years, and we moved back in October of 2022. October 1st of 2022 was our first day on the ground back here in the States. So, really quick, I want to backtrack to two things that my coaches had told me. Had two coaches that, looking back, I would still to this day, one of them's passed on and the other one's still alive, but if the one who was still alive told me to run through a brick wall, I would not ask questions. I would go as hard as I could, head down through that brick wall. But both of those coaches had two things that meant a lot to me, two quotes that I have carried with me throughout my life. The first one was, my name is Wilkins, my last name. My nickname was Wilkie growing up. Well, I was on the football field, and this defensive coordinator, his name's Carlton Thompson, and Coach T is what we called him, but Coach T actually played at Alabama before Bear Bryant. So that was a rough crew, and he was a rough coach. But I remember I'm playing defensive end, and we're in practice, and everybody's just dying. It's summer heat in Augusta, Georgia. Not all that different from Ocala in July, right? 2-a-days, and everybody's dying, and everybody wants water, but that was back in the day where the coach would literally let you die. Now if a kid dies, everybody's going to prison. Well, I remember hearing, Wilkinson, get over here, Wilkinson. Well, my name is Wilkins, and my nickname is Wilkie, so he was off on both accounts. So I'm just like, what in the world? So finally, I look over there, dadgummit, boy. He grabs my face mask. I call your name, you do what I tell you to do. Okay, if you call me by my name, I'll do what you tell me to do, but that's not my name. He said, what's your name, boy? I said, my name is Wilkins. He said, you want me to remember your name, boy? I said, yes, sir. He said, then maybe you should be a little more memorable. Oh, all right. So, athletically, obviously, I tried from that day forward to be a little more memorable. I would practice as hard as I could practice. I would play as hard as I could play. I would lift as hard as I could lift. Everything that I did, I was trying my hardest to be more memorable. The second quote, I was a pitcher, and I pitched through college, but when I was in high school, we were getting ready to face this kid who was the guy. So if in the state playoffs, we're getting ready to face this guy, and he's one home run away from breaking the state of Georgia home run record. And I'm a pitcher, and I knew that I was going to have to get Adam Blue out. And I certainly didn't want to be the guy on the mound who gives up the home run to break the state record. But also, if he beats me, then we're out of the state playoffs. My senior year is over. So I didn't want to lose. I didn't want to give up a home run to this guy. Well, my coach said, look, we've been scouting this team. We've been scouting this team for a number of weeks. We knew that it was going to come down to this matchup. If we're going to beat this team, you're going to have to think outside of the box. Okay, think outside of the box. Well, obviously the strike zone is a box from top to bottom. He said, you've got to throw pitches that look like they're in the box, but they're not in the box. You've got to throw pitches that start in the box and finish outside of the box. But if you want to beat Adam Blue and you want to beat Heritage High School, you're going to have to think outside of the box. Well, we went into that series and they won game one, or we won game one, they won game two, best of three series, and game three it came down to me pitching game three. Well, in game two, he tied the home run record. So it comes down to game three, and again, think outside of the box. Well, I'm not here to brag about my ability, but I ended up striking out Adam Blue 4 times that day. I made that poor boy spin himself into the dirt the entire day, to the point where the last pitch that I threw, it was in the dirt, our catcher blocked it and had to throw him out at first base. So now Adam Blue's jogging back across the field, and he's right in front of me, and I'll give you the cleaner version. But he says, I guess you're afraid of throwing me a strike. You're afraid of your fastball. And I just replied to him. Again, I was a competitor and not a believer, but I just said, this ain't coach pitch, boy. But what I did was had to think outside of the box. And what I'm going to challenge you to do today as a church, as a congregation, is to think outside of the box. Because right now we've got a world of 3.2 billion people who do not know Christ. 3.2 billion unreached people. Now here's the catch. That 3.2 billion people are almost exclusively, I say almost because I've been married for 19 years and I hear that using absolutes is dangerous. But nearly all of the 3.2 billion people are in 2 types of places. They're in either geographically very difficult to reach places, or they are in places that are hostile to the gospel. How are you going to get to them if you're not thinking outside of the box? I want to take you to a scripture really quick. If you have a Bible and you want to turn with me, I'll be in Matthew chapter 14. I would love to read this passage really quick. The passage of Jesus walking on water, starting in verse 22. I'm reading from the ESV. I'm not sure what version you guys read from, but I'll be in the ESV, and it says this. It says, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand, and he took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why do you doubt?" And when he got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Now, it was a number of years ago. I was in South Africa, and I was pastoring a church there that we had started, that the Lord had, and I could give you stories. I would love to give you stories of just how faithful God is with people who will just be faithful to him. If you will just do what he tells you to do. And my wife consistently calls them simple steps of obedience. It seems like a monstrous leap for us to end up in South Africa. In fact, when people talk about our story, it oftentimes makes me feel extremely uncomfortable, because it is this lofty status of, wow, what an incredible amount of faith it must have taken you and your wife to sell everything that you own and end up in South Africa. And the truth of the matter is, it's not true. It wasn't an incredible amount of faith. For us, it was a very simple step of obedience. The call was so clear. As we were just walking with him every day, getting up in the morning, spending time in his word, praying for the nations, including our kids in those prayers, he just made the call very clear. But it was simple steps of obedience. Well, once we were in South Africa, those simple steps of obedience continued. And I could tell you story after story after story of how God put me in the right place at the wrong time for the lost person over and over and over and over again. And how God's favor had me in back rooms with some of the most hardened gangsters in South Africa, in a place where the crime rate is the highest on earth and life expectancy is the lowest on earth. God was giving us open doors to people that click and pop with their mouth. And he sent a white boy from Georgia to go and meet them in a country where white people are hated because they have been oppressing the black people for so long. In fact, 1994 is when apartheid was abolished, and Nelson Mandela became their first freely elected president. Well, 1994 was not that long ago. So the people that we were working with were literally first generation freed slaves, essentially. So some of the first words that we learned in the Xhosa language was Umlungu Amba, which means white man leave. They didn't want us there. In fact, they hated us. But God, through simple steps of obedience, continued to give us open door after open door after open door. But all of that to say that those simple steps of obedience are no different than Peter out there on that water. So a couple of things I want to walk through in this story before I get to the ITEC story and just how it all comes together. The first is that these guys had just fed the 5,000. So this story is immediately after they had fed the 5,000. Jesus says, you guys get in the boat and you go to the other side. I'll meet you there. He goes up on the mountain to pray. And then Jesus, because he's Jesus, fully man yet fully God, walks on the water and meets them at some point in the middle of the night. Now, I don't know how strange that would have been, but I could imagine that would have been a pretty weird moment. You're on a boat. It's the middle of the night. Now, being with ITEC now for a little over a year, I was gone 120 days last year. I was overseas in some of the hardest contexts in the world, making sure that we were equipping indigenous Christ followers with some tools that they could use as a door opener to the gospel. But I slept in some pretty rough places. And being on a boat in the middle of the water at night sounds like some of the places that I've slept in the last year. But I would imagine they were exhausted. And they look out on the water, and what do they see? They see the man. They don't see God, they see a man. But they said it was a ghost. Well, Peter calls out to this person, "Who are you?" And when the voice returned, he recognized the voice, right? Well, the only way that you're going to recognize the call of God, the only way that you're going to recognize his voice, is you got to spend time with him. Those simple steps of obedience, they happen every single day at my kitchen table. Those simple steps of obedience, those things happen, they should be happening in your life. And as you take those simple steps of obedience, even if it seems like a ghost out on the water in the middle of the night, if it's God, you're going to know it's him because you're going to recognize his voice. And that's when Peter said, "If it's really you, then command me or tell me to get out of the boat and come on the water." So what happened? What did Peter do? He got out of the boat, didn't he? Now here's the catch, because as I was studying this scripture a number of years ago and I was teaching our church there in South Africa, I remember thinking, "Lord, why would you lead me to this scripture when everybody has over-preached this scripture?" This is one of the more notable scriptures in all of the Bible, and generally speaking, the pastor gets in the pulpit and the sermon becomes about Peter sinking. He lost his faith. He began to look around and he sees the wind and the waves and he begins to sink, right? That's generally the way that the pastor takes it. Well, Lord, why are you leading me to this scripture? Everybody's heard this scripture, and God just continually had me turn my focus to the men in the boat. Now, I know that hermeneutically, the author probably wants us to focus on Peter losing his faith, focusing on the wind and the waves. But in that moment, God just said, what's happening to the guys on the boat? So I'll ask you that question. What were the guys on the boat? What were they doing while Peter was out of the boat? You know what? We have no idea. You know why we don't know? Because God doesn't write stories about people who stay in the boat. God does not write stories about people who stay in the boat. Now, please don't take this the wrong way. I have no interest in being famous. None. My cousin was famous, and I saw all of the downturns of fame in his life. He's still lost. I wanted to be him when I grew up. Professional baseball player, all the fame, all the fortune that you could possibly imagine. And it has killed him still to this day in his early 50s. So I have no desire to be famous. I have no desire to be rich. Rich I could probably get around. I would like to be rich. That would be great. But this is not about fame and fortune. What it is about is God's fame. Peter was willing to get out of the boat, and because he was willing to get out of the boat, we are still talking about this story 2,000 years later. I mean, in fact, if you look at the end of John, we see that God had done so much during his time made manifest here on the earth that there was too much to actually write down. But he included a story about a guy, a simple guy, who continually failed over and over and over throughout Jesus' ministry experience, right? He was the one who denied Christ 3 times when he said he would never do that. But God used that guy to walk on water, and we still talk about it today. So my encouragement to you is, if you want to get people out, and you're on the mound 60 feet 6 inches away, you better think outside of the box. And if you're a believer, and you want to draw the multitudes to Christ, you want to draw your neighbor to Christ, you want to draw unreached people to Christ, you got to think outside of the boat. I'll tell you a brief story about 5 missionary men: Nate Saint, Jim Elliott, Ed McCulley, Roger Udarian, and Pete Fleming. I say those names every day, and you just got to be in front of people before you draw a blank. Those 5 missionaries were trying to reach a tribe in 1956 called, a derogatory term, in fact, at that time they were just known as the Auca Indians. The Auca Indians, Auca means savage or naked savages. They had had no contact with the outside world that was peaceful. In fact, the Shell Company was down there drilling oil and actually pulled out of the city of Shell, which was named after the oil company because so many of their workers had been killed at the end of Waodani's spears. These Auca Indians were savages. In fact, still to this day, they were the most dangerous, most violent tribe ever studied in human history. Not in South America or North America, in human history, they still to this day are the most violent tribe ever studied. A 60% homicide rate within the tribe. 60% homicide rate within the tribe. In fact, they lived by a few very simple rules. They were an egalitarian society, which means there is no hierarchy, so there is no leader. The rules are very simple. Rule number 1 was, if someone offends you, ignore them. And rule number 2, if someone offends you and you cannot ignore them, kill them. Rule number 3, if someone kills someone in your family, it is not only your right, it is your obligation to go and avenge their death and kill someone in their family. Which leads to rule number 4, which is you don't just go and kill one person in their family, you take your whole family and you kill everyone in their family so that there's no one in their family to avenge their death. It was a society of death. But that's not the way Nate Saint and the other 4 missionaries saw this tribe. Death and violence was all that the Waodani knew. They needed to hear and know of something different. And the only way that they were going to know and hear of something different is if someone went to tell them. So the date was January the 8th, 1956. They had done bucket drops where they flew what was known as the yellow plane, the would-be, over the top of these tribal people. And they had circled the plane so tight, an airplane maneuver in 1956 that people to this day, still pilots do not like to do that. It's hard on the plane and it's an extremely dangerous way to deliver goods. But the plane flies at such a rapid speed in such a tight circle that the bucket from a rope, a 300-foot rope, actually stands motionless at the bottom. So people can take things out and people can put things in. So that was how they were delivering goods to the Waodani people and making what they hoped was peaceful contact. Well, January 8th came. That was the day where they were going to land on Palm Beach, a beach that they had seen the Waodani near many times. They landed on that beach. Just before they landed, Nate Saint had radioed back to his wife, Marge Saint, and had said, "Today's the day. We'll radio back at 3 o'clock. Well, 3 o'clock came and 3 o'clock went. And there was no contact with the wives of those missionaries and their children. On January 9th, word had come back that all 5 missionaries had been martyred at the end of Waodani's spears. What a tragic, tragic end. You had Nate Saint, who was married to his wife, and she had 3 young children, a daughter and 2 sons. Steve Saint being a 5-year-old boy. who used to stand on a hillside that me and my son were on just a couple of weeks ago, down in Ecuador, staring at the runway, waiting on his father to land his plane and to come home. And his father never came home. What a tragic end to the story. What a horrible God we must serve. But again, as I said in the beginning, that God, in his infinite wisdom, amongst his finite people, he doesn't write our story in just one chapter. And it doesn't matter how ugly the story may seem to be. The story's not finished in one chapter. He will continue to write that story. And in fact, he says again in Romans 8:28 that he will work all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. He does not work all things for good for everyone. He works all things together for good for those who love him. And he does not say that all things are good. Death is not good. We've earned it, but it's not good. But he will work it together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. In fact, in Jim Elliot, one of his final writings, he had said in his journal, he is no fool to give what he cannot keep, to gain what he cannot lose. Simple step of obedience led to his martyrdom. In fact, one of the most famous stories of martyrdom in the last 100 years. But let me tell you about that Waodani tribe now. In 2024. My son and I were just with the Waodani tribe a few weeks ago. I travel a lot for work, and fortunately, from time to time, I take my family, which is pretty awesome. And we were in the jungles of Ecuador, so deep that there's no cell phone signal, there's no electricity. It was the most freeing experience of my life. My phone couldn't ring, no emails. Nothing, no contact, sleeping in a hammock for 4 days. But that tribe now is fighting not with each other. They are fighting to get the gospel known to the other unreached tribes of the Amazon rainforest. We were with Felipe, who's the youngest son of Mincaye, who was actually the one who had delivered the final blow to Nate Saint by the spear. And Felipe is walking with the Lord, discipled by a man named Henry, who's an Ecuadorian national who goes into the jungles to minister alongside of him, and they're trying to reach other tribes for Christ. The story's not written in one chapter. Now, what I'd like to tell you about ITEC really, as I know that we're nearing the end of my time here, there's an organization, we're just right down the road. And we would love to talk to you more about what a relationship with ITEC looks like. And I can promise you that it's not financial. I'm not here to ask you for money. God has blessed our ministry. The story of 1956 has enabled donors from all over the world to be a part of what we do. I certainly wouldn't say no if there were a donation. But I can promise you, if there is never a single penny ever given to ITEC, what I would like is to just talk to you about what a partnership looks like. Because that Uganda, that's one of the places where we go. It's one of the many places we go. In fact, we're in 73 different countries. And what we do is three things. We're developing creative solutions to meet felt needs of indigenous Christ followers that they can use as a door opener to the gospel. It comes in three layers. The first one is to develop. We develop a tool and a training system to meet the felt need of that indigenous Christ follower. So wherever we're going, the first thing that we do is we go and we ask them. Now, remember, the U.S., North Americans in particular, and the Western church at large, we're domineering cultures. And so many times we go to places and we tell them what they need. We were in South Africa for 6 years, and there are so many different things that are done. We had a group that came over and built a kitchen for a church. It's about a $40,000 project. You know who used that kitchen? Nobody. The Americans came over and told that church that they needed a kitchen, so they came and built that church for that kitchen. Well, the church can't afford the electricity to even turn the lights on, so they never even installed the stove. It made no sense to them financially. And what are we going to cook in a kitchen? All of us are starving to death. So nobody used that kitchen. So we shouldn't be going to places with our domineering cultures and telling them what they need. We should be going to them, listening to them, having them tell us what they need, and then we try to find a way to meet that need. At ITEC, that's what we do. We go to these places. It's one of the reasons that Rebecca and I went to Tanzania, was to go to the local Tanzanians and find out what they need. What is it that you need? What do we have at ITEC that we could help you with, that could help you meet the needs of your people here? Well, they asked us for medical training, and they asked us for mechanical training. So we can take mechanics there. I don't know if there's any mechanics in this church, but if there are, or people who are just simply mechanically inclined, you can use that skill not to fix someone's motorbike. You can use that skill to teach someone else how to fix their motorbike, so that when you leave, they can still fix their motorbike when it breaks down later on. So it's a mission that carries on after you leave. Rather than a mechanic going to a distant land, or a doctor going to a distant land and treating as many people as they can treat before they leave, and then 5 days later they leave, and those people are still left with all those problems, you can teach them in a way that they can solve their problems after we leave. It's no different than discipleship. We disciple in a way that they could disciple others, and they could disciple others and others and others. We're just doing it through skills. So we develop the tool and the training system to meet the need that they have. We take that tool and that training system to them, and we teach them how to use it. We leave it there with them so that they have a means to start it. Like if it's mechanical training, we leave them with the tools necessary to start a small little mechanic business. And by the way, when you're meeting that felt need, and our curriculum teaches all of this, incorporates the gospel in with the training. So you're not just teaching them how to fix a motorbike, you're teaching them how to fix a motorbike and incorporate the gospel at the same time, so that it is a door opener to the gospel. And then the final layer is we equip them. So we develop, we train, and we equip. Equip is that third layer, where we go back to a place where we've already trained, and we train them again. So we train the same group of people again. And then we stay for an additional week, and new students come in. When those new students come in, we watch the ones that we've trained times now, we watch them train. Layer where the trainee becomes the trainer. And we just guide them along in that process. Well, I want to tell you a brief story of what happened last year and what this looks like. Because many people say, oh, well, that's great. So you take it and you train it. But what does that look like when you guys go? What do you have any stories of what it looks like after you leave? I was in Liberia last year in February. It was the worst 6 nights of sleep of my entire life. Liberia is the hottest place I've ever been. Hotter than Florida. I promise you it's possible. I didn't think so either. But it was truly, truly awful. I slept on a wood pallet with a 1-inch thick mattress, so that, the slats in the pallets, that became parts of my body that I think are almost gone. But it was the coolest thing that I had ever been a part of. In fact, I only wanted to come back because my family was here, but I wanted to stay longer because I wanted to see what God was going to do there. But one of the trainees, his name was Joseph, and he had told me stories of him fleeing the Civil War back in 2010 to 12. where he actually fled across a river in a boat. His mom, his dad, his 3 other siblings, and the people with AK-47s, the rebels, were shooting at their boat. In fact, he was the only one that survived. He was the only one that survived. His mother and his father and his 3 siblings were killed that day. He ends up in the water, barely knows how to swim, ends up on the other side of the river, and survived getting into Sierra Leone. Well, he's now a missionary to his own people. We trained him in medical skills. He took those medical skills in the medical bag that we gave him, and he returned to a village of about 2,000 Muslims that had kicked him out twice. In fact, the previous visit, they said, if we ever see you again, we'll kill you. Well, just like those 5 missionaries, a simple step of obedience, he knew that his death would be worth an attempt at getting the gospel to those people. So he went into that village with this medical bag, and we said that if you came back, we would kill you. And they were getting ready to take him into the town, very hostile toward him. And he said, wait, I have a medical bag. I'm just here to treat your people. I'm just here to help you. The first day, he treated hundreds of people in that village with basic triage, basic medical skills that he had learned over 6 days the previous week. Day 1, 162 professions for faith who were baptized in muddy water. And that village now, once unreached, has a church in it. All because of a very simple tool that he had that could be used as a door opener to the gospel. Again, if we want to get the gospel to these 3.2 billion people, if we think that we're going to go to those people and we're going to do door-to-door evangelism, or we're going to do vacation Bible school, we're going to have a lot more than 5 martyrs on that Palm Beach. We're going to have a lot of martyrs. And I'm not saying that some of us aren't called to martyrdom. My son, Cy, recently said, I hate your job. And I said, why? And he said, because you're always gone. And I know that some of the places that you're going are not safe. And how do I know that you're going to come back to me? Well, that's a pretty good teachable moment, right? I don't like being gone as much as I'm gone. But that teachable moment is this, that even at home in our own beds, we're not safe. None of us. In fact, that boy, you could see scars all over his back and a scar on the side of his head where a fish tank jumped off the top of his dresser when he was 5 years old and should have killed him. True story. I held my son in my arms, thinking he was bleeding to death while I waited 23 minutes for an ambulance to get to our house in Augusta. He nearly died in the safest environment that I could possibly provide for him. I do everything in our house to make sure our kids are safe. And he should have died in that house. So we're not safe at home either. We're never safe. But God never called us to safety. He called us to faith in him. And if we want to reach these 3.2 billion people for Christ, if we want to reach our neighbors for Christ, he's not calling all of us to go overseas. He might be calling some of us. If we even want to reach our neighbors in Dunellen or our neighbors in Ocala, we're going to have to think outside of the boat. So my challenge to you and to me, to all of us, is that we would think outside of the boat. Moving forward, if you guys have, obviously Rob and I have close contact. He has my cell phone number. You guys all know where that facility is. We would love to have you out and show you around, show you what we do and how we do it, let you meet some of the people who are out training. But ultimately, we would love to talk to you about what a partnership looks like and how we could utilize your skills, whatever those skills are. And don't tell me you're retired. Because you know what retire means, don't you? It means you've got a new, fresh set of tires. You just retired. All right? So if you've got a fresh set of tires, let's go. Let's go do something. Let's go reach people. So with all that said, thank you guys for the time. I appreciate you very much. We're just down the road, and we would love to talk to you more in the future. Great question. What does ITEC stand for? It should be IPTEC. So it's Indigenous Peoples Technology and Education Center. So Indigenous Peoples Technology and Education Center. Great question. Shame on me for not saying that. Any more questions? That's awesome. So I believe that will be true more than the whole church is called to go. So the question is, how do we partner? Well, I believe that there's 3 layers of partnership. So one would be you go. One would be that you pray. And one would be that you send. So sending obviously comes at a cost, you know. My wife and I, we had to raise our full support to go to South Africa. We raise a pretty substantial amount of our support to be at ITEC here in Dunellen. But those and we're fully funded. So like I said, I have no interest in any financial contributions toward Rebecca and I, but ITEC, a team, we're getting ready to send a team to Cameroon next week. And that team will be in Cameroon. Those trips are not cheap. So every time we go, plane flights, the training tools that we take. And by the way, we have our indigenous partners there. I think that this is being recorded possibly to be utilized in some other places, but our partners on the ground have skin in the game as well. They can't, in large part, can't afford what we're bringing because these trips cost anywhere from $25,000 to $40,000 US each time we go. But what they can do is when we arrive, they can pick us up at the airport and transport us to where we're staying and back. So they can do transport for us. They can feed us while we're there. We'll eat whatever they eat. We'll sleep wherever they sleep. So we need housing, we need food, and we need transportation. I've eaten monkey meat, I've eaten groundhog, I've eaten, I mean, you name it. We ate some kind of rodent in the jungles a few weeks ago, and me and him were like, I'm not asking. You're not asking either. Don't you dare ask. I don't want to know. But the answer would be primarily pray. Pray for us. Pray for your missionaries that you know. Pray for missionaries that you don't know. Go online. One of the things that Rebecca and I used to do is we used to go and we used to just find a place on the map and just put a point on it, and then we would look it up online and we would look at the religious statistics of that area, and then as a family we would pray with our kids over that nation. But pray. And then send people who are going. Financially, again, it's not cheap. So be a part of it financially. We do. In fact, if you go to our website, you can see the 8 different trainings that we have. It's itecusa.org. You can see the 8 different trainings that we have. And he was asking about our master gardening program, or we teach conservation agriculture, teach it all over the world. But that conservation agriculture is one of the 8, but we can equip you in all of the 8. So it just depends on what you are already equipped in. So if you're a farmer, obviously that would be the easiest thing to teach you. If you're a doctor, it's easy to teach you the medical. If you're a mechanic, we can teach you the mechanical training. So if you're an electrician, we have a solar component that we teach. So you can come to ITEC and we'll teach you what you need to know. Yeah, so so the three medical, we teach medical, dental, and optometry. So those are the three layers of medical. And by the way, you don't have to be an optometrist to teach optometry. You do have to be a dentist to teach dental. That's the one that's the most invasive that we do, and it's obviously dangerous. If you do it wrong, people can die. So we do require that you're a dentist. If it's medical, it could be a nurse in any layer of nursing. It doesn't have to be an RN, and it doesn't have to be an MD. It can be anyone who's in the medical profession. So medical, dental, and optometry. And then we teach agriculture or farming. We teach film. Film is pretty cool. Every place we go, they have smartphones. Even in the jungles of Ecuador where phones don't work, I don't understand that, but they have them anyways. But we can teach them on a smartphone through a free app how to tell their story, short documentary style films. So the story of the 162 coming to faith, we had already trained them in film, so they were able to document that story, and then they can take that short documentary and they can take it to neighboring villages and show what God is doing in villages not far from there. So film, farm, mechanical, and then solar and UAV. Solar is, your basic, especially in places like Africa where even where electricity exists, but it's very unreliable. In South Africa, my kids are probably up here going, yeah, I know what that looks like, where our power would be turned off for 12 to 16 hours a day. So you had to prepay for it, but they got to decide when you got to use it or not. So solar is helpful in those areas, and then UAV is an unmanned aerial vehicle. And if you were to come out to ITEC, we could show you some pretty cool technology that we've developed. A GPS-driven drone that has no human interaction, but can deliver medical supplies into the jungles 40 miles out and 40 miles back. Again, completely autonomous without human interaction, which is pretty cool. There's only one ITEC in the U.S. here, because this is where Steve Saint lived. Yep. And really the way that ITEC was birthed in 1996, the Waodani had asked Steve Saint to come and live in the jungles with them, and he asked the question, what do you want me to do? And the Waodani said, we don't want you to do anything. Since 1956, all of these missionaries have been coming down here and they've been doing for us. We want you to teach us how to do the things that outsiders have been doing for us, so that when you leave, we're still able to meet the needs of our people and we can share the gospel at the same time. So that's really the mission and vision of ITEC, and it was actually started by the Waodani. But Steve Saint and his family lived in Ocala. In fact, the house that we live in was Steve Saint's house. So he raised his family in that house, and I bought that house from him. So me in particular, my wife is Jamie Saint's executive assistant. So she doesn't travel unless she goes with me, which I wish was more, but she only went to Tanzania with me this past year. But my job here at ITEC is the director of operations. So I am under Jamie. Jamie, I'm his right hand. So he's the executive director. My job is to make him look like an all-star. So like I said, I'm a teacher. I don't love to be on the stage. I like to build the stage and then get other people on that stage. So this is quite uncomfortable for me. But when I go overseas, generally, because we have so much experience on the field as full-time missionaries, I interact with the people before we send teams over. I go over to interact with them, find out what they need, and then come back and report to our team and say, this is what they need. And that could be one of the 8 things that we've already developed, or it could be something that we have not developed. In fact, a partner in Uganda, ironically enough, had reached out to us and actually come to ITEC. He happened to be in the U.S., and he said that the conservation agriculture that we had taught them was actually working so well that they couldn't store the grain. They're producing more grain than they can consume, and they can't sell it fast enough, so they were looking for a solution to store that grain or fruit. And so we are actually in the elementary stages of producing a solar dehydrator that we could send to them, send the blueprints to them, and then they could create their own solar dehydrator. But my job is to listen. Anything else? All right, well, we finished way before 9 o'clock, so I don't know if 7:13 is late or not, but I know it's before 9 o'clock. So, well, thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate the opportunity to stand here. Know that I'm not here because I'm so smart and so gifted. I'm here because God continues to see fit to write my story, and I just count it a privilege to be here with you.